Jared Spurgeon's injury timetable has been revealed. Plus, it sounds like things are progressing to the finish line for a Ryan Hartman extension. And what does that mean for the potential to tweak the roster in years to come? We'll discuss all that and more on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked on Wild.
Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the course of the week. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we'll talk about Jared Spurgeon's injury and how the Wild will fill his spot in the lineup until he is able to return. We'll also look at where he could potentially slot in to the schedule as he gets back up to full speed. We'll also talk about Ryan Hartman's impending extension, figures thrown around today, as well as the total length, which means that this thing is pretty close to being done. So we'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about what it means for the Wild's ability to take their roster and make tweaks over the next few seasons. All that coming up on today's show. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. As we mentioned off the top of the show, for those that didn't get a chance to see it in last night's preseason game against Chicago, Jared Spurgeon was injured relatively early on in that game. I think it was during the first period, if I recall correctly. But Spurgeon was going to collect a puck along the boards, and something called Reese Johnson came over and crunched him up against the boards. He left the game, left the bench, and from reports in the first intermission and the second intermission, were that he was getting looked at in the training room. And after the game, Dean Evison said that it was not positive, the update on Spurgeon at that point, but that the team was going to kind of wait to see before they made any sort of further designation as to what sort of timetable we'd be looking at. And come to find out today, upper body injury for Spurgeon, and the Wild tweeting out that he is going to be week to week. But as Michael Russo alluded to, the feeling with the team is that it's not going to be a situation that will require Spurgeon to be put on long-term injured reserve. So, as I had tweeted out earlier today, just looking at the potential timetables for what could be missed from a games played perspective. If we go with 2 weeks missed, Spurgeon would miss 7 games. 3 weeks would be 10 games. 4 weeks would be 13 games. If it's more than 2 weeks, that then includes a stretch of games starting on October 9th that features at the New Jersey Devils, home against the New Jersey Devils, home against the New York Rangers, at the New York Islanders, at the New York Rangers, at the Buffalo Sabres. And the situation with long-term injured reserve is pretty clear-cut, because in order to put a player on long-term injured reserve, they have to miss more than 10 games, or they have to be on the shelf for 24 days. So the fact that the team is, at least at this point, not going to put Spurgeon on long-term injured reserve leads us to a shorter time frame for him missing games. Now, if we do go with the 2-week angle, obviously that would have him out of the lineup against the likes of the Florida Panthers. But then as we look at the schedule through the first 2 weeks of the season, the Wild then go at Toronto on the 14th of October, at Montreal on Tuesday the 17th. They're home against the Los Angeles Kings on Thursday the 19th, home against Columbus on October 21st, then home against Edmonton on Tuesday, October 24th. That's 2 weeks right there. Now, if you look at a 3-week timetable, then obviously you are missing the game at the Philadelphia Flyers on October 26th, at the Washington Capitals on the 27th. But to be honest here, the games that I am concerned about Spurgeon missing is the Devils games for sure. I'll put the Edmonton game on that list as well. And let's throw the Los Angeles Kings into that equation, and probably the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. Those teams that play that faster speed of game to where they have multiple players that are extremely fast that can get to your goalie in a very quick fashion. Those are the games that I'm most worried about during this stretch. Florida Panthers, not as much. Obviously, losing Jared Spurgeon is a problem regardless. But the Florida Panthers aren't a, run and gun style super speed. They are more of kind of they're similarly built to how the Minnesota Wild play. So the speed doesn't come into play with them as much as, say, Los Angeles, as much as Edmonton and New Jersey. And, November 10th, the Buffalo Sabres as well. So if we say this is between a 2 to 3 week issue, then that puts him right around November 2nd for an anticipated return. And it was mentioned as well that if it does end up that he needs to be put on long-term injured reserve, that you can do that retroactively. So the Wild, by stating that he's injured as of today, 2 weeks down the line, if he still isn't showing progress, you can retroactively do that. You could say, well, he was injured as of the 6th. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because then the cap situation comes into play as well. And if you put him on long-term injured reserve, that allows you to spend his contract over the cap. It's not like you just deduct his cap hit from your current salary cap. It allows you to spend above what the current cap is. And I don't know if the Wild would go that route if this is going to be a more long-term injury, but with it being upper body, it points to, shoulder, collarbone, things along those lines, especially on hits getting crunched into the boards. Those are kind of the spots that your mind goes to. But I think based off of the initial, oh no, here we go, the fact that it's going to be maybe 2 weeks early in the season is I think a relief for Wild fans, to say the least. So let's just pencil in right now November 2nd, and we'll see if he returns before that. We'll see if he returns, later than that date. But that's, I think, going to be kind of where my mind goes as to a potential return for Spurgeon. And as far as the lineup goes, we already know how this is going to play out because we've heard it. Dean Evison already said that Alex Goligoski, in the meantime, will fill in for Spurgeon in that spot. So it's going to be Goligoski, Middleton, Brodin, Faber, and Addison and Merrill then both will play. And the Wild will determine kind of as needed if they need to bring an additional defenseman with them, for instance, on road trips. I highly doubt for home games that they will do that, so they can continue to accrue salary cap space as the season wears on. So Spurgeon out week to week. In the meantime, Goligoski, Middleton, Brodin, and Faber, and Addison and Merrill will be your defense pairings for this team. Now, that's not the only news of the day. It seems as though talks with Ryan Hartman are pushing to a point that it could very likely be done within the next couple of days. So we'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. We are moving to the fall and eventually then the winter, but that doesn't mean that Bird Dogs is going to stop cranking out the hits. I was able to get myself a pair of their amazingly comfortable sweatpants. And so not only does Bird Dogs own the shorts game for you all summer long, you can get their sweatpants to stay cool and comfortable no matter what you're doing throughout the course of the winter, whether it be working out, inside, going for a walk, or just sitting on the couch watching football all weekend long. These Bird Dog sweatpants are too comfortable to pass up. They feature cloud knit fabric that looks just like any other material, but it stretches, so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. And they use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Plus, when you order at birddogs.com/lockedonnhl and enter promo code NHL at checkout, you'll get a free Bird Dogs water bottle with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnhl for a free water bottle at checkout. Word of warning, though, once you put your Bird Dogs on, I guarantee you are not going to want to take them off. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will have Alex McLetty for you on Monday, recapping some of the news of the weekend. By that point, it wouldn't surprise me if we have an official announcement of a Ryan Hartman extension. But regardless, we'll react to that, and we'll get you set for the start of the NHL season, which is next week already. So as mentioned, it sounds as though things are getting to about the 5-yard line for a Ryan Hartman extension. Elliot Friedman reporting earlier today, no surprise, but the Ryan Hartman extension is getting closer in Minnesota. Sounds like 3 years at a significant raise from his current $1.7 million. Michael Russo, tweeting an hour ago, told the same thing as of 40 minutes ago at least. It was not completely done and is still being worked through. Jay Fresh on Twitter mentioning that it was a 3-year deal for $4-ish million per season. And so if you look at it as similar to what Matt Zuccarello got for the Wild, $4-ish million to stay in Minnesota through his age 32 season. And honestly, it's interesting because we've got the Foligno extension for 4 years. We've got the Zuccarello extension for 2 years. We've got the Hartman extension inevitably for 3 seasons. And it's a similar situation to what we saw with Foligno, where it feels like you could maybe have done this after the season was over. I like Ryan Hartman. He is a player that he showed 2 years ago that he was capable of being a productive member of the Kirill, Kaprizov, Matt Zuccarello line. He played great with them, was leading the team in goals through the early part of the season. Obviously, last year battled injuries, battled frustration, battled penalties, you name it. And so the first 2/3 of the season were not particularly good. The last third of the season, when he reunited with Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello, he looked good again. And so Bill Guerin is banking on, with this extension, he's again banking on a player being able to replicate what he did or come close to replicating what he did 2 seasons ago, as opposed to what happened last year. If it were me, we've talked about this with the expectations for what needs to happen for that first line, what we're hoping for in numbers. But if you can get that first line to 90 to 100 goals and Kirill takes half of that, I feel pretty good that Matt Zuccarello and Ryan Hartman both can be 20-goal guys. It may not be that Hartman is a 30-goal scorer ever again, but I feel like he can up from the 15 goals that he had last season. And so Bill Guerin paying a top-line guy that can give you right around 20 to 25 goals a season, $4 million, is a good value. That's the pro side of this. The con side, again, is that you are paying a guy who is going to be over 30 once the deal is done, had a ton of penalties last year, was injured on a fight last year and missed a good portion of time, was demoted in the lineup. You name it, it all happened with Ryan Hartman last season. And so the cons, just as a whole, is you now have pretty much filled your roster for multiple seasons. And I know this has been pointed out in the comments before that prospects don't always work out. And so having a lineup that is more veteran heavy as opposed to the all rookie experience that a lot of teams have done over the past few seasons, it doesn't always lead to a quick turnaround as people hope it would. But again, it's the optics of this, I think, that people are frustrated with the most, is that you have retained a large majority of a group that has gotten to the playoffs the last two seasons, but has just not been able to get it done from a postseason perspective. And so what people want to see then is changes to rosters. Try a couple of different things, maybe a new player here, a new player there, to try to give you a better chance of exceeding where you were at, as opposed to just ramming your head into the wall over and over and over again and hoping that inevitably, before you knock yourself unconscious, that you're going to be able to break through that wall. I think is where the frustration comes from here. And, it's entirely possible that if Bill Guerin makes a move, or let's say Marco Rossi performs well this season and starts to show that he's capable of a higher role in the lineup, then you can move Hartman down in the lineup to, say, third line, and I think he would be fine there too. If Rossi doesn't, then I think you may see Bill Guerin go try to get somebody that can play higher up in the lineup. And so Ryan Hartman is the 1C for now. I don't know that he necessarily stays there, but for a guy that can contribute, if he can get to 20 goals, if he can, and I'm not even saying abandon the edge. I don't mind players having kind of that chip that allows them to be productive during the season, but just be on kind of the right side of it, as opposed to what we saw this past season where his tendencies were to go overboard a little bit. If we can see that sort of performance this season, then I don't think $4 million is a terrible price point for a guy like Hartman. But again, the point that I will reestablish and refurther with these is that they're gambles by Bill Guerin. Bill Guerin is gambling that all of these guys are going to be able to get back to similar to where they were 2 years ago. If they do, then these all are going to look great. If they're all able to get to even 80% of where they were at 2 seasons ago, these deals will all look fantastic. And there's going to be a lot of people that are like, you know what? I'm just going to stop second guessing. But if they don't, if we get a repeat of last year for Foligno, if we see a little bit of more signs of age from Matt Zuccarello, and if Ryan Hartman can't stay out of the penalty box, that's when the seeds of doubt start to creep in. And for a franchise that is trying to position themselves to keep Kirill Kaprizov around, the doubt then is where the mind is allowed to wander as we go. So that is kind of where we're at with Hartman. I would imagine we'll have, hopefully by Monday, a firm idea as to what this extension is going to look like. But I would imagine it'll be 3 years, $4-ish million, which again, if it's a 3-year, like $13 million, $13.5 million contract, again, if Hartman can get to 20, 25 goals, that's a good value for that type of player. Time will tell. And to pivot off of that, time will also tell what this means for the ability for the Wild to take this group and try to tweak depending on how results play out over the next couple of seasons. We'll talk about that to finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. When you are attempting to create the ultimate fantasy team, do you ever wish you could draft the same types of people for your business team? If you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you pay only for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/locked-on to start hiring now. Again, that's Indeed.com/locked-on. Indeed.com/locked-on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, coming up next week, we'll have Alex Micheletti on the show on Monday to take a look at some season preview angles for the Minnesota Wild. I'm sure we'll have some Ryan Hartman extension to discuss as well. We'll get you geared up for the season, which starts already on Thursday against the Florida Panthers. We've got a ton of season preview content coming for you next week as well. So make sure, if you haven't already, that you subscribe to Locked On Wild on your favorite podcast platforms. So let's just take stock of where things are at with this Minnesota Wild roster. So you've got Kirill Kaprizov, who is signed through the end of the 2025-2026 season. You've got now Ryan Hartman, who will be signing an extension at some point here that I would imagine would be another 3 years, which would put him through 2026, 2027. Matt Zuccarello signed through the end of 2025-2026. Joel Eriksson Ek and Matt Boldy both signed through the end of the 2029-2030 season. Actually, Eriksson Ek, I beg your pardon, 2028-2029. So those guys locked up long-term. Marcus Johansson signed through the end of the 2024-2025 season. Marcus Foligno signed through the end of the 2027-2028 season, as is Freddie Gaudreau through 2027-2028. Marco Rossi, a restricted free agent, he will be signed through the end of the 2024-2025 season. Your fourth line could all be gone after this season. Brandon Duhaime, an unrestricted free agent. Connor Dewar is a restricted free agent, and Pat Maroon is an unrestricted free agent as well. On defense, Spurgeon locked up long-term. Brodin locked up long-term. Middleton locked up through the end of the 2024-2025 season. Alex Goligoski is a unrestricted free agent after the year. John Merrill is a free agent after 2024-2025. Brock Faber, restricted free agent after 2024-2025. Kalen Addison will be a restricted free agent after the end of this season. Then you got Philip Gustafson locked in through 2025-2026. Ladies and gentlemen, this roster is essentially completely set for at least the next 2 years. And so, yes, we did see Pat Maroon acquired in the offseason to help cultivate on that fourth line. But beyond that, you don't really have a ton of opportunities unless somebody gets hurt. You don't have a ton of opportunities to look at this from other angles, to bring players in to try to help get you over the top. And so let's say we get to the postseason again this year. Let's say it's another first-round exit. Next year, same thing. How many times is it going to be acceptable to run it back, to bring back the same group? And I understand with the cap penalties that the next 2 years, you really don't have a ton of space to be able to do a lot. And so locking everybody in to kind of get you through that without having, massive turnover, that's what Bill Guerin wanted to do to try to keep this thing rolling, to try to keep this team playoff caliber. But we now are starting to push into the seasons in which the money is essentially all back. And so you have essentially your top 9 players all locked in for 2025-2026, the first year that you have more money that you can actually spend. On defense, you have maybe 2 spots that you're going to be able to fill, but I would imagine an extension for Middleton will be something that'll be looked at. Brock Faber will be due an extension at that point. And so, if you need to go fill spots or to just kind of subtly tweak to try to, get over the top, okay, we need more top 6 scoring, so go get a top 6 guy. We need better defensemen to help even out our D pairings. The spots are not infinite for what has been put together here. And so, I see the levels of frustration because it just would seem logical, as we had discussed after the season was over, to give some of your prospect pool a look to see what they're capable of, to see if they can fill some of those spots. But now it's looking like if they need to, they're going to dip into that pool a little bit to go get somebody to fill in, but then you are moving pieces around in the lineup. And I saw it tweeted out today, and I had to bring it up to finish the show today. And I forget who tweeted it. Forgive me for that. But I saw someone mention that Minnesota is turning into a place that everybody wants to play, which is a good thing. It's a good thing that people want to play here, want to stay here to finish out their careers or what have you. But you need to be careful of turning into a place that is comfortable with results, because that's then where a 7 straight postseason series having been lost turns into 11 or 12, where you end up like the Minnesota Twins and you lose 18 straight postseason games because you're comfortable with being a team that's in the conversation postseason wise, playoff caliber. That's a word we hear a lot because you're comfortable being a team that is playoff caliber, but then you get these teams that routinely just cycle players. Yes, they keep their top guys around to try to have some stability up there, but these teams that move players in and out depending on what they need are the ones that you see that end up winning. I mean, look at the Vegas Golden Knights. Look at the roster turnover that those guys have had since they came into the league. You had the expansion draft, and they basically just have been using players and prospects like cards at a blackjack table. And they won the cup this past season because they made some great trades at the deadline. Now, not all of those guys are sticking around. They did retain a few of them, but that's going to be another Vegas team that, depending on what they need to do this year, they'll make more moves. And so it's going to be very fascinating to see how these next two seasons play out, because if things start to not go well, now you have added no movement clauses to the equation. You've added multiple years to extensions. And so if it gets to a situation where you want to really try to kind of shake it up, you don't really have the opportunity to do that. And I know Bill Guerin said that this is not going to impede prospects from being able to get chances to play. But again, you've got like your entire top 9 locked in for 2 to 3 seasons, some longer than that. And so the only spot you have available to play them seems to be on that 4th line. So we'll see. We will, of course, have more on the impending extension for Ryan Hartman, as well as a look to the regular season come next week as well. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the course of the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.